to be an advocate for openness and transparency. Why has there been such a slow trickle of information? Why weren't you more forthright off the bat?
As I said, this was a personal family vacation where we visited someone who I have known pretty much all my life. But of course, any questions that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner has for me, I'm more than happy to answer.
In French, please.
Comme je dis depuis le début,
I've said since the beginning,
vacances personnelles en
these
famille.
were personal vacations. This was a personal vacation with my family, visiting someone I've known for a long time. It's a long-term family friend. I've known from a very young age, and obviously I'm always open to answering questions from the Ethics Commissioner that they may have for me.
On the fundraising issue, also dubbed the Cash for Access controversy, you know, we were at a coffee shop in Manotick a couple of minutes down from where you were, and even here, people have been saying it doesn't smell right. Something doesn't smell right. Somebody said I can't use the word stink because I can't say that on TV. But Canadians are uneasy with that. We've heard your lines, we've heard the lines of the government leader in the House as well. But do you realize that this is an issue for Canadians, that it's resonated for Canadians, and are you prepared to introduce new rules?
I think the first thing is to reassure Canadians that at the federal level, we have extremely strict rules around fundraising, maximum limits on personal donations that need to be respected and are respected, a ban on corporate and union donations, and transparency and disclosure for any donations made. So the fact is, there is already stronger rules on the federal side than we find in many places across this country. But part of this tour is also demonstrating the level of openness and accessibility that I campaigned on and that Canadians want to see from their government. We are listening to everyone, and that is what Canadians expect from their leadership. Comme j'y dis régulièrement,
as I've said regularly, Canadians have confidence that at the federal level, the rules covering political fundraising are extremely strict, covering personal donations and prohibitions from corporate and union donations, and there's transparency, total transparency and openness. So Canadians can have faith in the system. At the same time, I'd like to emphasize that the conversations that I'm having today with Canadians of all diversities, through today it's Ontario, but in the coming weeks across the country, are part of the openness and transparency that Canadians expect from their government.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. David Aiken, the National Post. Again, I'd like to ask another question about the vacation. You traveled on the Challenger to Nassau, and the Aga Khan's Island is 115 kilometers from Nassau. Could you explain how you traveled from Nassau to the Aga Khan's Island?
Yes. The travel back and forth from Nassau to the island happens on the Aga Khan's private helicopter, which he offered us the use of. And that's something I think we're in the process of explaining in detail to the media. And it's something that certainly we look forward to discussing with the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. But we don't see an issue on that.
COC on that one?
Oui. Le déplacement entre la ville de Nassau et
travel between Nassau and the Aga Khan was done by private helicopter, and that's the way for travel in that part of the world, and the Aga Khan offered to transport us on this helicopter, which is something that we are disclosing to the media, and I'm very open to discussing this with the Ethics Commissioner.
When anybody becomes a minister, you have to file a confidential disclosure form with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And I'm told that oftentimes that disclosure will include a list of names of friends and relatives who may have dealings with the government. They might be a lobbyist, might be a supplier. I'm wondering, did you supply such a list to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner? Was the Aga Khan on that list? And would you now commit to making that list public?
any public office holder or MP has to submit and answer a very detailed questionnaire from the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner on a broad range of things, from personal bank accounts to business interests to properties held. I have not seen a list of associates or family friends that could cause problems, and I didn't provide any names on that. But the fact that the Aga Khan has been a longtime family friend is well known. He was a pallbearer at my father's mildly publicized funeral a number of years ago.
Prime Minister Josh Wingro from Bloomberg, your officials have been having discussions with the officials of Donald Trump ahead of his incoming inauguration. Can you say whether they've yet indicated whether they do, in fact, want to reopen NAFTA with Canada?
Obviously, Canadians expect us to have a constructive working relationship with the incoming administration, and that's exactly what we're focused on doing. The relationship, the trade relationship between Canada and the United States is extraordinarily important, not just for Canada, but indeed for the United States and for many, many jobs. We are the #1 export destination of 35 different American states. So our economies are very closely intertwined, and on our initial conversations between senior members of my team, including our ambassador to Washington and members of the incoming American administration. There have been a broad range of discussions on the level of integration of our economies and how to move forward in a way that benefits the middle class that we both got elected to serve. And that's those are the substance and tenor of the discussions at this time. And we will have more to say as those discussions and as the new administration comes into office.
Said specifically whether they do want to reopen
I'm
NAFTA?
not going to go into detail on the nature of those discussions, but I can assure people that they have been constructive and positive discussions about protecting Canadian jobs and the Canadian economy while looking at better collaboration and cooperation with the Americans.
Thank you.
I'm Victoria Gibson from Queen's University Journal. Thank you for taking our question. Your government committed $2.6 billion over 5 years to Indigenous education funding, but a briefing from Carolyn Bennett revealed that was pretty limited to primary and secondary school funding. And in 2015, there were $90 million of applicants for status Indian or Inuit students to pursue post-secondary education, and only $15 million was granted. Why did that happen, and how is that going to be fixed?
We committed during the election campaign to removing the 2% cap on funding for Indigenous communities and education. We're continue to be committed to that. Indeed, we've invested on top of the, aside from the $2.6 billion in funding for education, a total of $8.4 billion in Indigenous communities and infrastructure and supports. There is an awful lot more to do. We know that education and closing the parity gap in education, both accessibility and outcomes for Indigenous Canadians is a priority, not just for this government, for all Canadians, and that's something that we continue to work very, very hard on. There's a lot more to do. There's much more work to be done, much more investments to be made, but we are making the initial steps that are going to begin the transformation in the relationship in this country.
Okay, and follow up to that, you started out your time as Prime Minister with pretty strong ratings with students and with youth, but in the past couple of months there have been a few demonstrations sort of contrary to that, people turning their backs on you, students protesting your pipeline plans, things like that. Do you think there has been any sort of breach of trust between yourself and young Canadians, and what do you plan to do about it?
Oh, I will continue to engage with young people, and the one thing that I've recognized is how important young voices are in challenging the status quo and pushing for change in the right direction to build a better world. And that's why I'm so proud of having pulled together a Prime Minister's Youth Council that represents young voices from across the country who directly advise me, why we've pulled together a panel on youth employment, why we've made good on our commitment to make post-secondary education more affordable by increasing by 50% the Canada student grants for low-income and middle-income students. students. We know that getting a good post-secondary education is essential, not just to young people, but to the community and the country that they are going to be part of in the coming years. We continue to work very, very closely with youth, and I'm incredibly proud to be Canada's Minister of Youth on top of being Prime Minister.
Hi, good afternoon, Prime Minister. Christy Kirkup from the Canadian Press. Just on the topic of electoral reform, you made it known again today that in the past at least that your preference was a ranked ballot system. How does letting everyone know that's your preference influence your government's process on electoral reform?
As I've said time and time again, I recognize the breadth of perspectives and the strongly held feelings that people have about various models and various solutions on electoral reform. My commitment and my responsibility as Prime Minister is to make sure that the path forward that we take is the right one for Canada, is the right one for Canadians, and takes into account the broad range of views and perspectives, which is why we had town halls all across the country through last fall, why the Electoral Reform Committee worked so hard to put together an outstanding report, and why indeed people can still, for a couple more days, sign on to mydemocracy.ca and share their perspectives and the values that underlie their concerns and hopes for our electoral system.
If I can also ask you about the nature of this outreach tour that you're doing right now. You were meeting with children earlier today in Brockville, Ontario, and there are Indigenous children today in a community in Northern Ontario that are in the midst of dealing with the suicide of two 12-year-old girls. There are other young people in the community who are believed to be at risk, so I'm wondering how you prioritize where you go and who you spend your time with, especially if kids in remote areas don't actually get the chance to talk to you like some others did today.
We are focused on getting out to meet with as many Canadians as possible. I've been to remote Indigenous communities, and I've been to more populous communities, and I will continue to engage and meet with Canadians of all ages and of all backgrounds on the tragedies that unfortunately continue in Indigenous communities, particularly with young people. Our Health Minister, our Indigenous Affairs Minister have been very closely engaged in this. We are responding with investments in mental health, in crisis response teams, in the kind of community support that will hopefully address this problem in the short term, while at the same time we understand that the investments that we're making in education, in Indigenous languages and culture are the kinds of things that end up giving opportunity and strength to communities that are battered by challenges such as youth suicide and addiction and mental health challenges.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, merci de prendre nos questions.
Thank you for taking our questions. 12 years of the embassy in Haiti. Are you concerned, and do we have reasons to believe that there is fraud elsewhere? Obviously, we're greatly concerned because the integrity of our embassy system, diplomacy, is important not just for Canadians, but for the entire world. People need to have faith when talking to Canadians, whether in an embassy or elsewhere, that they will be well treated and their interests and the interests of the country are being represented and not the interests of personal equity. So we are looking very closely at what happened, and we are always monitoring that everything is done properly throughout the world. In the past week, you've been greatly criticized for your trip and your fundraising, that you're privileged and elite, etc. Are you trying to eliminate that image today? We've been planning this trip for many months. I've been doing this for a long time, very long time. This is a follow-up I'm doing since I was a simple opposition MP to to travel across the country and take questions openly. This is my way of being a good politician, and even more importantly, to be a good prime minister. To listen to people, to understand their concerns and answer them, and demonstrate that, to me, citizen commitment in our political process helps represent them and is part of how we are going to improve our democracy and the performance of our democracy. I continue to greatly love these opportunities to exchange ideas with Canadians, even though, as you said today, there were exchanges that were and questions that were a little harder. For me, this is essential to keep democracy healthy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. It's news to us in this room here that you flew on a private aircraft to the Aga Khan to his private island. And I'm going to read something that is directly from your website under the Open and Accountable Government section of your own website. It says, ministers and parliamentary secretaries must not accept sponsored travel, i.e. travel whose costs are not wholly paid from the Consolidated Revenue Fund or by the individual personally or his political party or an inter-parliamentary association or friendship group recognized by the House of Commons. This includes all travel, non-commercial, chartered, or private aircraft for any purpose except in exceptional circumstances and only when prior approval of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner and public disclosure of the use of any such aircraft. Any hospitality accepted must strictly adhere to the requirements of the Conflict of Interest Act. We know from your prior news conference you did not reach out to the Conflict of Interest officials. So how are you able to swear that you didn't break the rules when clearly the rules on your website so clearly say you can't accept that kind of travel?
The fact is, as I've said, I am engaging with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to answer any questions she may have. And the fact is, as I've said many times, that the Aga Khan is a personal family friend, and travel to and from the island only happens through private means. But of course, this is something that we are going to engage with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner on.
And as a follow-up, U.S. intelligence agencies have determined that Russia tried to influence the outcome of the U.S. election. Have Canadian intelligence agencies given you any indication that the Russians or foreign powers have tried to influence the 2015 election? And have you taken any steps to prevent any sort of actions in 2019?
We are currently undergoing a cybersecurity review with Public Safety Canada. The Minister Ralph Goodale is engaged on this. We take cybersecurity very seriously, both of our institutions, our commercial institutions, and also our democratic institutions. And this is something that that I know Canadians need to be reassured by. The fact that we have a strong, extraordinary strong community, CSEC, that is the communications and security establishment that is there to protect us. And we continue to work with them to ensure that we are free from cyber attacks or the impacts of the cyber attacks that happen in Canada. Nous sommes toujours en train d'être vigilants
forever vigilant with regard to cybersecurity. We're currently working on a review of cybersecurity in Canada. Minister Goodale is leading this. And in the meantime, we continue to work with CSIC and others on the need to protect our institutions, both commercial and government, from any foreign interference. Thank you very much, everyone.